Hi guys, so for those of you who don't know, my name is Michael and I am the woodworker for MK Designs, and welcome to part 3 of the mobile miter station build. This is should be the final piece of it. Today we're going to work on the top and get all the little extras like the top track and the tape measure and get the saw lined up and get everything aligned and flat and get it ready to go. So yeah, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is I need to fit, because I'm making a modified torsion box top for this build, I need to find out what size the center pieces that go in the middle to actually create the torsion box need to be, how wide they need to be. So what the best way I found to do this is to start at what you think it needs to be, make it a little bit long, and then take a scrap piece of the material you're going to use for the bottom and your piece that you cut for your vertical inside pieces, and then take another scrap piece for the top. Put those three together next to your saw and take a flat straight edge and make sure it's flush. If it's not, which it shouldn't be if you cut a little big, then you just take it to the saw, trim off a little bit at a time until you get it perfectly flush, and that way it comes out to be dead accurate, dead perfect every time. And as you can see, I've got the saw actually sitting on the scrap piece that's representative of the bottom, because that's the way it's going to be once the top is built. And that way it makes sure it gets everything flush exactly how it has to be. Once I have that figured out, then I can start breaking down the plywood. So I'm going to cut everything to rough size, and then I'll take it over to the table saw and cut it down to final size, and I'll start by cutting out the bottom and the top and go from there. Once I have all the pieces cut, then it's time to start assembling, and I decided not to bore you this time with drilling all the pocket hole screws, because there's quite a few in this. Now I am building it from the top down, so this piece right here is the top flipped upside down, and I'm attaching everything to it this way. The reason for that is a couple reasons. One, I don't want any metal on the top getting in the way of anything, so I want to be able to attach everything from underneath the top. And two, I don't want, because it's not very deep, I don't have enough room to get in there and attach everything with it already partially assembled and get it all straight. Even with a 90-degree torque adapter, there's just not enough room to get in there and do it. So I am building it from the top down, and what I'm doing is I lined the back of it up and clamped it down, got everything flush and clamped it, and then I'm just going through and driving the screws that way, and I just work my way down, keeping it flush the whole way and driving the pocket screws in. So for the back of it, I wanted two pieces, but I didn't want to laminate them together with glue just in case I had to take everything apart and make any adjustments or anything. So I didn't use any glue on this part of it. So instead, I just took some clamps, got everything lined up and flush with the second piece, and I'm just going to drive some cabinet screws into it, and that'll hold it just fine. Now the reason I wanted the double back was just for a little bit of extra stability, since I am going to have to make the cutout for the miter saw itself to sit down into this thing. And then I just continue with the same pocket hole process on the sides. I just work one piece at a time, get it flush, clamp it down, and drive my pocket screws in. Now this is another reason for having the two pieces on the back. You see the two screws that go horizontally into the back, and that's to make it a little more stable, to keep it from rocking back and forth, help keep it straight up and down, and give it a little bit more support. And using the two pieces on the back gives me a little bit more to drive those screws into. Once I have the sides on, then it's time to start working on the center part. And this is one of the more critical areas, and because I don't have the edge of the bottom piece, or top piece in this case, to try and flush it up to, I want to get it as square as possible. So I take two measurements, one at the front, one at the back. Then I'm going to use my squares to make sure it's straight, and flush with the front and square with the front at a perfect 90-degree angle, and then I'll attach it using pocket screws as well. One of the reasons this is so critical is because this is going to be the first piece to actually create the opening for the miter saw, and I want that as straight as possible so that from there everything lines up perpendicular, perfectly square, and exactly where it needs to be. So I'll get my clamp in there and I'll clamp it down, and then I will take some clamps and clamp the piece in place and then drive the pocket screws. And then from there it's just a matter of measuring and squaring everything else up and then driving pocket screws to attach the other two pieces. Now on the angle piece, you can see it has a little bit of a gap there, and that's simply because of the way it's cut and putting it in there. I can't get pocket holes in there, pocket screws in there to be able to hold it flush at the bottom, because remember this is all upside down, so you're looking at the top up flipped over, and then this will be the bottom. So this will be the only little bit of metal that I want shown on the front or the top, and I just drive some finish nails in there to hold it at the bottom to help keep it straight up and down. So before I put the bottom on, I want to go ahead and install the drawer slides. So I just put some spacer blocks in there and install the drawer slides exactly the same way I did on the cabinet. And again, I'm doing it now instead of after I install the bottom because of the space limitations. I wouldn't be able to get in there to actually drive the screws and all that once I have the bottom in place. And this is what it looks like with the slides in place. And now I can attach the bottom. And the way I'm going to do this, I'm just going to put the bottom in place and then line up one corner, get it flush, and pop a brad nail into it just to hold it in place temporarily. Move to the other corner and do the same. And then I will go around it, putting some brad nails in just to hold it in place long enough for me to get some screws driven into it. Now before I go any further, I'm going to sand where I drove the screws in just to get any burrs that popped up or anything like that. Get it cleaned off, flip it over, clean that off, and move it over. Now when I say move it over, I mean I'm going to move it over onto the cabinet. So I move my cabinet in place, and then I just slide it over, and it's fairly easy to move. A little heavy, but easy to move. Okay, so because of the way my shop is, I knew this was going to be an issue. That's why I built the top separate from the bottom, and I didn't put the top on the bottom in order to finish it. But you see that gap in the front right there. That is because of the way my shop floor is. I don't have a concrete floor. I have decks, and when I was building this thing, I knew it was going to be an issue. So the way I'm going to solve it is I'm going to get everything, get the top lined up exactly where I want it, and I'm going to put some shims between it and the bottom, and I'm going to screw everything down that way. That way the top is resting perfectly flat, and the bottom can sag or whatever it has to do to be able to move across the deck the way it does. So yeah, I'm getting everything lined up, getting the top lined up exactly where I want it, and then I'll put the shims in, and then I'll drive some cabinet screws into the bottom from the bottom up into the top. And this is where we're at. The top is perfectly flat, and I'll just use a flush trim saw to cut those shims off. Now before I cut the opening for the miter saw to sit in, I want to get the drawers cut and prepped and in clamps, glued up in clamps, so that they can be drying while I'm making the cutout. So first I'm going to rip them to width, then I'll cross cut them to length. So I know I've mentioned a few of my friends in this build series, but I'm going to mention one more here. Drew Short with Rockin' H Workshop. He has an excellent video for half-blind lock joints. Yeah, half-blind lock joints. I watched his video. I've never made I've always done dovetails on drawers, but I wanted to do something different for these top drawers. So I watched his video, and I actually cut these perfectly the first time, basing it on his video. So there'll be a link to his video down in the description. So yeah, that's what I'm doing here. I'm getting everything set up so that I can cut my pieces to make half-blind lock joints for the top drawers. And then once I have my pieces cut, then I will glue them up and get them into clamps. So while those are drying, I'm going to cut out the opening for the miter saw to sit in. So I'm going to start by drilling a couple of holes on the top corners, or back corners I should say, and I'm going to cut it out with a jigsaw. I'm going to rough cut it out with a jigsaw. So that's what these holes are for, to allow me to make the turns and have a good stop and start place if I need it. Now, those of you that know me know that I absolutely hate using a jigsaw. I abhor it. But in this case, it was the best choice for me to use, and so I just used the jigsaw to rough cut it, and it is a very rough cutout, as you can see. But I have a trick up my sleeve, and it's called a router with a flush trim bit. So I'm just going to take the router and put my flush trim bit in it, and just going to get it smoothed out and exactly how I want it. And as you can see, it's a perfect fit. Seriously though, I did this on purpose just to show you my reasoning for not using glue. I took it apart and made some adjustments and fixed it. So once I have that all fixed and the miter saw in place, then I can take the drawers out of the clamps. They've been sitting overnight probably at this point, and I can cut the rabbet out for the drawer bottoms, and I've just got a rabbet bit in my router table. I just have to figure out how to orient the thing to be able to hold it flat. My router table is not very big, and this is the biggest problem with something this size, trying to use it on a router table. But it's definitely safer to do it this way and do your best to keep it flat than it would be to use the router freehand on the drawer itself. It's just a lot safer this way. Like I said, just make sure you keep it flat on the table. Once I have the rabbets complete, then I'm going to place my drawer on top of the drawer bottom, and I'm going to mark where I need to round off the corners. I find it easier for this to round off the corners than it would be to square off the corners on the drawer. And of course the easiest way to round off the corners is with a belt sander, so I just bring it over to the belt sander and round off the corners and check it every so often to make sure it fits, and that's that. And then to attach the bottoms, I'm just going to use some glue. I'm going to put some glue in the rabbet, then place the drawer bottom in, and use some pin nails to hold it in place. So now comes one of the dilemmas with building one of these things, and it's one of the, I personally think it's one of the great woodworking dilemmas that people are constantly on different sides of it. So whether or not to have a fence. I know that Mark Spagnuolo, when he first built his, he had a fence, and then he redid it without the fence and just put T-track in the bottom. So I went back and forth on it, and I came to the conclusion that I want a fence, and here's why. Okay, so just for the sake of argument, let's say that the level here is a fence, all right? And you got the fence here, and a lot of people, the reason they don't want a fence is because they've got all this wasted space back here. But for me, this would be a great opportunity to add more storage to this. Since I'm not going to have upper cabinets and it's going to be mobile, I can take some of my scrap plywood and I can build a box here, and I can have storage for things that I use on a regular basis. Kind of like the center of the split top Rubo, where you've got the storage bins in the middle of some of them, but then on this, it's going to have a box in the back that I can just toss pencils or tape measure or whatever, stuff I normally use on a regular basis, especially with the miter station itself. And yeah, I mean, I can see the dilemma of if you've got it up against a wall and you got upper cabinets or something along those lines, of not having that back there, because it'd free up more space. But for me, I think the fence with the boxes back there actually serve a great purpose. So that's what I'm going to do. So the first step to making the fence is I want to cut out all my pieces, and you see that little notch that I have right there? That is the part that's actually going to go over the back fence of the miter saw itself. And before I glue anything up, I'm going to attach my top track. Now the reason I'm doing this is because the top track in place will actually help me flush everything up on the bottom when I go to glue everything together. Once I have that on, then I want to glue the small piece of plywood onto the bigger piece of plywood. The bigger piece of plywood is actually going to be the base, and the smaller piece is going to be what the top track will sit on and will allow everything to get flush. So I'm going to put some glue on there and clean that up, and then drive some screws into it, and then attach the top piece. And I'm going to attach the piece with the top track the exact same way, and this is why I put the top track on first, because it will actually allow me to flush everything up with this part right here. And then I want to install the fence onto the miter station itself. So I have my level there, and I've got it flush up against the back fence that's on the miter saw itself, and I'm using it as a straight edge to make sure my fence is perfectly straight to the existing fence. And I'm just using the clamps just to hold it in place. I'm not putting them very tight to make sure that the level doesn't warp out of alignment or anything, but it is the level itself is extremely straight, and it does allow me to do that. Once I have them clamped, then I will drive some screws into the back. I'm not using any glue on this part in case I ever have to move it for whatever reason. So yeah. So next I want to install the face boards for my top drawers. I've already installed the drawers, and I did them exact same way that I did the drawers for the cabinet. And if you missed that, there'll be a link to that video down in the description. And I'm going to install the drawer fronts exactly the same way I did there as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the center and find out where my holes for my drawer pulls need to go. And I'm going to drill those holes, and then I'll use some double-sided tape to attach the face to the drawer, and then I will drive some screws in there to hold it in place temporarily, and then I'll pull back those screws out, drill the holes through the face, and attach the pull, and then attach the face itself with a couple of screws in the back. Now I want to create the little boxes for storage in the back behind the fence that I was talking about. So I just chose a random width, one that I thought looked good and made the most sense, and cut them down to width, cut pieces down to width, then I cut them to length, and I'm just going to attach these with pocket screws as well. And now for the finishing touches. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the measuring tape, and this is the Craig measuring tape. I got one for the left side and one for the right side, and Craig has really good instructions on how to attach these. Basically, I chose a length of 15 inches and I cut a board to that length, and I pushed it up against the saw blade and then made a mark where that 15 inches is at. And I'll start with 15 inches and I'll work my way towards the saw and then out from the saw, pulling the backing off and pressing down as I go, making sure it stays square and flush inside the top track. And then I'll just cut off the ends with a pair of 10 snips and press it down, and then file off the edges, because this is a metal tape, and if you don't get it cut quite flush with the end and you don't file it down, you walk past it, you can actually cut yourself. Now once I have the left side tape on, I'm going to go ahead and put my flip stop on, and I'm doing this before I do the right side because I want to set the right side based on what I set the cursor to on the left side for the flip stop, so that it's interchangeable. I can use it on either side and without having to move the little window with the line in it. So again, I'm just going to follow the Craig instructions. I put my T-bolt in and then screw it down, and then I'll slide in the little window and get everything lined up and make a test cut and make sure it's working. Then I'll move on to the right side and put the tape on over there. Whew, that was a lot of work, and but well worth it in my opinion. I'm going to be able to get a lot more done a lot faster, and this is going to speed things up so well. And I wanted to address one issue. I know that in Mark's video about the fence, part of the reason he said he didn't want the fence was because if you've got a board that's not exactly straight, then it's going to throw off where you actually need to make the cut. And he is right about that. It will. The biggest difference for me is if I'm that concerned about where the cut is exactly going to be, one, I'm either going to use my table saw, or two, I'm going to make sure the board is milled, because the only time I'm going to be using that where a board wouldn't be straight and dead flat on my fence is when I'm rough cutting it to length so that I can get it milled easier. I don't have a 6-foot joiner or things like that, so to join a board for me, I have to cut them down to smaller sizes. I get them rough cut to the length, to roughly the length that they're going to be, a little bit longer, and then I'll mill them, and then I'll cut them to exact size. It just works out easier that way for me, and yeah, it's just the easiest way to do it. So again, you know, yeah, the fence is going to throw it off, but at that point, at that stage of the game, I'm not so concerned about it that I need to not have a fence. So for me, I'd rather have the fence. You're perfectly willing to make your own choices. One of the great things about this design is the fact that it is so versatile. If you purchase the plans but you don't really need a miter station, you don't have to make it a miter station. You can make it a worktop, a workbench. You can make it an outfeed table, make it a little bit shorter for an outfeed table, you know, a glue station, assembly table. You could do anything with it. You could leave off the top, torsion box top, torsion box style top. You could leave that off and make it anything you want. You could put 2 layers of plywood on it, make sure they're flat, and just make it a standard workbench or a mobile cart. You know, use it for the storage. Don't include the drawers. You know, put shelves on the sides instead of the bars for the clamps. There's so many different things you could do with this. You could do away with the fence if you wanted to, and put just the T-track in the top of it. It's open. It's totally open. You can do whatever you want with it, and I encourage you to do that. And if you do purchase the plans and you do something different with it, share that with me. I want to know that. You know, email it to me, put it down in the comments, you know, put pictures of it down in the comments, you know, send it to me on my Facebook page, Instagram, whatever. I want to see that. And yeah, so this is one of the reasons I'm so excited about this is because it is opening up an opportunity for me to do something about all this. Yeah, and that'll be coming up soon. And yeah, until next time, guys, happy creating. So I've had quite a few people tell me that I need to get a haircut. I know a few people that might be upset about that.